Hi, friends. Today we're moving on with our series about networks and their implications for ministry. And we've talked about the three types of networks: the centralized, decentralized, and the distributed. We've defined the centralized and talk a little bit about biblical examples, our experience, and our convictions. Now we want to do a deep dive into decentralized networks. So, Hun, what's the decentralized network? What's that all about?
Okay, so if you remember the story about the well digger, in centralized, he was the only one who had a well, and everybody had to come to him. So now in a decentralized, he has taught others how to build the wells. And so now he's not the only source. There are several vetted leaders, so to speak, who have kind of their own little networks. And so you can see that it's spreading out as far as there's more leaders, there's more potential for reaching out to others, and so it's a kind of solves the problem of growth.
Yeah. And now that one person in a centralized setting is they're delegating authority, so they're not the only one resourcing and making decisions. So it does provide the opportunity for growth. So let's take a look at the strengths and weaknesses. The first strength of the decentralized is that it reduces the strain on leaders and resourcing. Anytime you grow and you don't delegate, it just puts a lot of stress on the leaders and the system. But once we delegate and start pushing responsibility and authority out towards the people that are really providing decision-making resources, now we limit the stress on those leaders and the system.
Yeah, and along those lines, it also helps, the leader that's been entrusted to make decisions, and they're right there, so they can kind of make a better call because they know exactly what's happening versus the centralized leader who might be a little bit more removed from the situation.
Yeah, there's an old story from the Vietnam War where, the captain and his men are fighting a battle in the jungle, and the colonel is flying over them in a helicopter and can't see through the jungle. So the colonel has to let the captain on the ground make tactical decisions because he sees what's going on. That's a decentralized model right there. And what decentralized does is it provides a lot more opportunities for leadership and to grow leaders because now we're pushing that authority and responsibility out to other people.
Yeah, and it also helps to lighten the load in that the burden is being shared by multiple leaders. So there's not such a heavy responsibility on one leader. So.
Yeah. But like the centralized, the decentralized has its weaknesses as well. Sometimes because we've delegated to other leaders and other leaders have different gifts, talents, abilities, opinions, there may be discontinuity across the network. And so uniformity is lost in decentralized networks. So.
Yeah, another issue that tends to happen is sometimes those leaders that have been delegated the leadership to kind of start to quibble with each other, like they think that, their way's the best, other ways. And so you could end up with some people that are kind of in opposition.
Yeah.
Even.
Yeah. So the potential for losing uniformity and unity is right there in decentralized. Now, you can lose both of those in any network system, but it's more likely here in the decentralized. A decentralized network requires time-consuming leadership training. Because remember, as we push that authority and responsibility out, we have to have vetted leaders that can, with integrity, manage those resources and make those decisions. Now, this kind of catches centralized networks by surprise if they don't start training leaders at the very beginning and then they have rapid growth. Now all of a sudden they're caught in a circumstance where they've gone beyond their capacity, but they don't have the leadership to manage that growth. And so it's very important that people that start with a centralized system in the beginning realize right up front, I better start training leaders now because we're going to grow and we're going to need them.
Yeah, and then another weakness of the decentralized network is that, the further away from the leaders, the harder it is to know what's happening. Like, the boss has delegated leadership. He might not know that third tier of workers or people.
Yeah, and the water gets muddier and muddier the more tiers of leadership that you get involved in the process. So you delegate the delegated authority to another person who delegates authority to another person. All of a sudden, we have no clue what's going on at the edges of the network. So let's talk about some biblical examples. We'll go to the Old Testament first.
Yeah, I think the example of Moses, when his father-in-law Jethro comes to visit him and he sees Moses basically judging people from morning till night because he's the only one. And he gives him some advice to decentralize, choose able men of integrity who can, be over a certain amount. He gives them like a specific way to do it. But it's basically he's saying you need to decentralize because you are taking on way too much responsibility here.
Yeah, you're acting like a crazy man. What are you doing? And then we see Paul and Barnabas when they're going throughout their church planting mission. They're planting churches, but then they're appointing elders for those churches. That's decentralized, delegating authority and responsibility to those individual churches and providing leadership, local leadership for them. So,
and then we see Jesus's model of, the choosing of the 12 and then, training them to be the leaders of the church. And, yeah. And
then a negative example we see in Revelation where Jesus is talking to the churches and he points out that there are people calling themselves apostles, but Jesus said they are not. In fact, they are false apostles. So one of the weaknesses of a decentralized network is you could either have incompetent or false leaders in the network. And that's what the early church was bumping up against, and Jesus calls them out. So what about our experiences with decentralization?
Well, I think that we pretty much have always seen this as a really good way to do ministry. other people would accuse us of slinging people in the breach. The guy, that guy's not a leader. What are you doing? Why are you putting him in charge of this or that? And it's just giving them big shoes and hoping that they'll fill them, or cheerleading them on, in teaching them, and being with them to figure out how to do that. But there were many times where people looked at us like we were crazy for letting that 18-year-old lead a Bible study.
Yeah, they were like, how do you put up with such messy ministry? Well, the answer is messy ministry promotes leadership development. Jeff Sundell, responsibility is like fertilizer. So we're growing these leaders. We saw this in the early stages of No Place Left, where we made a conscious decision. We wouldn't have a president. We wouldn't have a CEO. We would keep the leadership very flat and delegate and train leadership right out of the gate. And it got messy, but the results of that were trained and vetted leaders worldwide. It was really amazing how quickly leadership rose to the occasion and took on the mantle of laboring, discipling, sharing the gospel, planting churches, and facilitating that work with many other people in many other countries. So decentralized was the way to go with that rapid growth. Mm-hmm. How about bad experience?
We probably have a plethora of bad things. I remember at one point we had a lot of young leaders that were kind of, responsible for their own area, and it was like on a military post, and they were constantly griping about, hey, that's my area, don't take my people from my area. And so it's like, kind of some squabbles that would happen. And it's like, just continuing to cast a vision helped out a lot, hey, the post is big enough for everybody plus, Yeah.
And if you go back to Jesus decided to decentralize by training the apostles, the subordinate leaders. But he had the same problem, the disciples walking behind Jesus having an argument. Who's the greatest? I'm the greatest. You're not the greatest, And so I feel like Jesus was willing to take the risk of raising up young leaders who could be proud and arrogant and, competitive. But he took that risk for the sake of training those leaders. So we've arrived at some personal convictions, and we feel like that there needs to be a plurality of leadership. When the Bible talks about elders, it's always plural, and deacons. So when we talk about leadership, we're trying to get as many capable leaders involved in the process of making disciples as possible, just like Jesus did. And we're willing to take the risk of training them. And when we train them, what are we training them to do primarily?
To help people follow God and look at the Word as, and the Holy Spirit as the ultimate authority.
Yeah, so that is the primary task of a leader. Point to Jesus. So ultimately, we're pointing them to the one who has the real authority. So you're pretty safe when you do that and train leaders to do that. All right. We hope that's helpful. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next video.